Okay. Hey, well, good morning, everyone. Thank you for joining us. With our special meeting for the Gilpin County Board of County Commissioners. Today is July 30th, 2024, and the time is 9 a.m. I will now call our meeting to order. And now for the agenda review, are there any changes to the agenda?
Yes.
No?
Excuse me. Yes, there are two that I'm aware of. On the resolution, it is actually not for the READY grant. It is for the Energy and Mineral grant. And we also have the Board of Equalization at 9:30.
Okay, thank you. And do we have a second to the motion for these changes? Okay, all in favor? Aye.
Aye.
And we'll have the two changes to the agenda. And our attorney is not here, so we go ahead and if County Manager Rears can go ahead and proceed with the conflicts of interest.
Sure. Just confirming that each commissioner does not have any conflict of interest of any item on today's agenda. We need an affirmation of that for the record.
I have no conflicts of interest.
I have no conflicts of interest.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you. And we'll move on to public or press comment. This is limited to 3 minutes each, and County Manager Rears will keep time. And do we have anyone signed up to speak? Okay, if no one signed up, and is there anyone online?
No one online, Commissioner Berman.
Okay, and having no public or press comment, we'll move on to Resolution 24-108, which will authorize staff to submit a grant application to the Energy and Mineral Impact Assistance Fund. Presenting is Rob Gutierrez, Director of Community Development.
So as Director Gutierrez is getting ready, I think it's important to share some context here that previously the board authorized a grant application for READY, and he will describe exactly what that entailed for the Rollinsville town site. But the last week, I actually received a call from our DOLA representative encouraging us to apply for a different program after we had received the denial from the READY grant. There is a 50% match, and so that's why this is a special meeting today, as well as why it's on consideration, because we need authorization from the Board of County Commissioners to apply for this second different grant for a very similar project, but I'll defer to Mr. Gutierrez to go into the greater detail.
Great, thank you. Good morning.
I have our new planner here, Rachel Behill. I know you've all met her individually. This is her first time with us for the board. She helped me do some work on this, and I think it'd be some good experience for her. In case we do some other projects in the future, hopefully she can help us out and lead on those. So we're coming back to you kind of on the same issue, but is seeking the Energy Impact Assistance Fund grant from DOLA. As County Manager Rears spoke to, we received a recommendation to apply last week from Regional Manager Chris LeMay. This has been something I think we've been talking about for at least a year now, kind of going back to, maybe early mid-23 about the issues we have in Rollinsville that are a barrier to economic development and will be a barrier to new construction or even changes of existing building use, as we learned last year, and then that was discussed in the All About Rollinsville meeting that was held with the public at Timberline Fire's headquarters, I think that was several months ago. So this is a little different than READY. I do think that this grant is better geared towards this project because a lot of the things that would be accomplished by this project are goals of the grant program, particularly the promotion of affordable housing, climate resiliency, which give you extra points on the scoring, and I kind of overviewed that in the staff report. On the resolution, I tried to kind of go into quite a bit of detail about the purpose and intent of the project so that you'd be able to kind of see what we were thinking, and then also provide feedback on that if you think it needs to be modified. But it's kind of broken down into these 4 items, the first of which would be studying the technical and financial feasibility of different approaches to deal with the lack of a public water system, the lack of water for firefighting, and the lack of a public wastewater system. So we really wanted to approach all those options. Obviously, the simplest and probably most affordable would be a public water system for the purposes of firefighting. But we wanted to look at the other options, such as an independent public water system, which would just be standalone water, independent public water and sanitation, or a combined public and water system that could be connected to the town of Netherlands system, which we kind of had informal conversations with them about over the last several months. So those are those 4 approaches we want to take there. Item number 2, we wanted to study the feasibility of a rail station in the Rollinsville area that would be connected with the mountain rail that has been proposed by the governor in Routt County. We wanted to look at potential locations for a station, identify a locally preferred alternative, and kind of do some of that groundwork ahead of the curve if that ends up coming to be. And then we wanted to look at maybe estimated costs of station development. One of the things both on item 1 and 2 that I was hoping with and kind of is reflected in the change in the budget from the original Ready grant, we were seeking a total project cost of $150,000 with a $30,000 match. This is a 1-to-1, and we are asking the board for approval up to $300,000 total project cost with a $150,000 match. And the reason for that is one of the hopes that I have is if we're going to go through the trouble of doing the high level, I was hoping that we could actually deliver some of the detailed baseline engineering work, because one of the issues that this county faces and a lot of smaller local governments face is we are good candidates for these type of grants when we're doing high level planning work, but we often don't have shovel ready projects because we haven't done any design work. We haven't done any preliminary engineering. And there are, as you know, there are a lot of opportunities for infrastructure grants. One of the grants we were awarded was local planning capacity, but there's another component to that. There is local infrastructure. So there's the planning capacity, but there's also grants for DOLA for infrastructure programs. And that could be a great opportunity that could help maybe fund one or portion of some of these projects. And so I was hoping that we can do the high level, look at feasibility, answer some of these questions, work with the community to kind of get feedback and develop a vision, but also do some of the baseline engineering work, particularly if it's for water sewer, or if it's like a public firefighting water storage system, get some of that baseline engineering work done so that we can be ready to submit to a grant if for maybe construction, or maybe there's another mechanism by which we do this. I was hoping to actually deliver some solutions at the end of this. Same for the rail station. I'd like us to examine the feasibility, look at proposed locations, and then potentially even do some baseline work of basic station design, which would simply just be, you know, probably the most cost-effective approach of a platform and very simple parking lot area. So that, you know, when that train comes down the tracks, we have something that's ready to go, and we could seek either state or federal funding to make sure that that happens and we don't get left out on that project, which I know is kind of a concern that we had because we're small. Let me look at the last 2. So items 3 and 4 is a little bit more detail too than we did on Ready. Is, you know, we have other issues there other than the water and the sewer. We have the fact that the public right of way is not clearly delineated. The condition of the roadway is poor. We're seeing an increasing amount of visitors in that area, particularly on the weekends. We know we have a parking issue. We know we don't have any stormwater infrastructure there. So those are some of the things that we also want to look at as part of this is what are the options there? How do we address that? And then finally, we wanted to look at, well, not look at, but we wanted to develop an area specific plan that could be an amendment to our comprehensive plan for this area specifically. I think that's important because I think we need to get feedback from those in the area, but also from the county as a whole of where they think this place should go in the future. One of the points, and me and Rachel spoke about this very particularly, is I think we want to make sure that whatever we do here, the infrastructure or the planning side, that the overall goal of this would be to develop the area or promote the area as a community hub for Gilpin County and for visitors equally. I think that's an issue in the county, that we don't necessarily have kind of a hub outside of maybe the community center in mid-county, where the county feels like that's a place for county residents, where people can connect, where people can interact. And I think Rollinsville has great potential to do that. And I think a lot of residents, do visit, particularly on the weekends, now that we have, a brewery there and a restaurant there. So I think we're really trying to promote that angle of a community place more so than just, it's not necessary. I think a lot of mountain towns in Colorado have had an issue becoming more of a visitor attraction, and then you don't really have a community center. I think we're going to try to balance those two. And then some of these other points were just incorporated to be consistent with the grant.
Which ones are those?
This is 4, so I just spoke about 4A, develop and adopt an area-specific development plan as amendment to the county's comprehensive plan. And then there's some additional funding and high scoring if we incorporate some of the more housing now best practices. We definitely wanted to highlight in this plan that we want to promote locally owned small business as the engine of economic growth, not necessarily, larger scale business or business coming from the outside. I think there's a lot of potential for locally grown business in this county. I think we've seen that with the businesses that have started there. And then also, with the new brewery in mid-county, I think we want to make sure that whatever we do continues to promote that. And then the last point, which I think is important on 4F, is identifying potential government mechanisms such as establishment of special districts or incorporation that could be utilized to finance, construct, and operate improved public infrastructure systems for the area. What I wanted to do as part of this is have a consultant help us identify how would we build this, how would we finance this, and how would it be operated and maintained for the long term. Give you as commissioners and the community kind of a pros and cons approach of those different mechanisms and what could work. So it's not a specific, like this is what we're going to end up with, but I think we should get an analysis of, look, these are the potential things you could do, whether it's incorporating, whether Rollinsville decides to incorporate as a town, whether you look at establishing like a redevelopment district with a redevelopment authority, what are those mechanisms? What would that look like? Anything else you think we've missed? That's kind of the summary of where we've come with this.
One of the items in the application was resiliency for climate resiliency.
Yes.
So which one of these items are addressing that?
So one of the things that the grant scores higher on is the affordable housing and climate resiliency. I didn't go into a ton of detail on that here. I wanted to, we've just been a little constrained for time. But I think in particular, the establishment of a public water system, or at least a public water system for firefighting, is going to be very important for the long-term resiliency of this community. I'm concerned about the potential long-term impacts that we may observe from declining snowpack, changes in rainfall precipitation patterns, in the county's ability to, because everybody there is on a well. So I think, especially if the option of connecting with Nederland works out, I think that could be a really great option for resiliency for the long term, of ensuring that residents in this area of the county do have access to water for the long term.
Yeah.
So that's kind of, I think, our main pitch on resiliency. And I think the rail station idea, it also speaks to that point on resiliency, just looking at DOLA's grant. I think even if, and me and Rachel spoke about this, even if the mountain rail program doesn't come to fruition for whatever reason, we do know that there is the Amtrak ski train that does run in the winter months. And I still think that there's an option for us to participate in the expansion of that system, or at least have a stop here for that system that could be used for people to go to Eldora, or could be used for people in this region to go to Winter Park. So I think any options that support multimodal transportation of getting into Grand County, because there's really one way, and that's US 40, I think would also support the state's climate resiliency goals.
Right, because the train, one goal, and I know the train came up in a previous meeting, and I've since talked to the commissioner that's been the lead on that, and there's not going to be a meeting about the rail, the mountain rail, or any more about the rail, probably till September, maybe even October, but September That's what they're thinking, because there's really nothing going on with it. And one goal of the whole project for rail in Colorado is to reduce greenhouse gases by promoting public transportation. So that's definitely a goal if we should ever have a stop. I also know in the past, when I first started, my first year, I did have contact with Union Pacific, Amtrak about stop. And the first thing they said was if they ever felt like there would be enough ridership, that they would require an ADA compliant stop with paved parking. I mean, they have really specific requirements. So that would be an expense that would have to be covered somehow. And you're correct, there are many infrastructure grants out there that we miss as a county. And those started back even with the ARPA money. You know, a lot of other communities were grabbing millions of dollars and we were grabbing zero because, like you said, we didn't have shovel-ready projects, the analysis, the planning, and all of that.
Mhm.
I have a couple of questions. You kind of answered it because this is much more expansive, but the Ready grant was 150,000. This is 300,000 up to. So my question was, why the big difference? And then the Ready grant, we had approved 30,000 match because that was a 20% match. And this is a 50% match. So you're looking for us to approve up to 150,000. Is that, are those numbers correct?
Yes.
Can you just explain, it may also be when you answer, maybe the Ready grant was limited to the smaller amount, the 150, and this is more, this has a higher threshold that you can apply for.
Yeah, that is true, that we were kind of limited on the Ready grant, and, you know, when we met with Chris LeMay after submission, you know, he told us, he was like, I don't think this is necessarily the best grant for this. Did you consider energy impact assistance? And so, and then he also asked us, would you consider doing less in lowering, increasing your match and lowering the amount that you're requesting? We said, yeah, we could do that. So that is some of the background there, that this grant does offer a bit more money for what we want to do. I think the reason, and because we're kind of still, you know, the budget process is very preliminary. And so I was coming to you just seeking what I think would be ideal maximum. And then I was going to look to County Manager Rears to maybe, you know, modulate that based on what's going to be available next year. Cause this would be a 2025 match. And we were planning on budgeting $150,000 for this project up front under community development's budget for 2025. So I figured, why don't we just double that match and go from there? And if we want to work it down, we can, once we know a more refined cost estimate. Based on conversations I've had with firms, just the study for water and sewer, and that's just kind of like high level study, could easily run between $50,000 and $80,000 just for that component. So I know that's 50 to 80, an area specific plan, I mean, maybe low range 35 to 65,000. And then anything beyond that, like doing more detailed engineering for like a train station or even for the water sewer, I mean, we could easily get up to $100,000, $200,000. So I was trying to get the most that we can to actually deliver us not only a study, an area plan, but some actual engineering work that could be useful in the future.
Mhm.
So that's kind of where that ask was coming from.
Yeah, so in a lot of ways, this, with the engineering work, this will be helping to lay groundwork
I
for
hope so.
moving forward.
I hope so.
So a little more efficiency in terms of utilizing the initial grant money and studies.
And I think, you know, that we're kind of doing two things at the same time. We're studying the feasibility, but we're also trying to do some of the work. But what's true is, I think in the initial part of that studying the feasibility, if some of these just, you know, particularly on the water sewer, if the technical and financial feasibility is just not there, then we're not going to spend that money going any further, and we'll leave it at that, you know? But I think there is going to be some feasibility there. So it's like we're kind of trying to budget for both, but we have to ask the first questions to get to the next part.
Okay.
The train station, though, I think that we can easily do both.
What happens if you do the water feasibility initial study and it just physically or financially is not viable? Are we still obligated to move forward with this grant?
Well, we would
To
use
do the
that money to
engineering?
answer those questions, but I think we would kind of, you know, modify it from that, and we could either use the funds that have been awarded to focus more on the other areas such as the train station or the area specific plan?
Will we have that flexibility in the grants?
yeah,
I know
yeah.
sometimes the grants are very definitive of what you can and cannot do.
Well, we could talk about DOLA with that, but those are like goals and of the plan itself, so we're not adding, we wouldn't be adding anything new, but maybe kind of refocusing some of the dollars. And we can talk with DOLA about that, but I don't think they would have a problem with that.
And I think it
This
would
is a-
also be in the contracting with whoever we would hire. That would be built into the contract that if the feasibility comes back that one aspect isn't feasible, then they would be diverting the resources to the other areas.
And this is
Oh,
really to
my
ultimately
concern
have
is,
a-
you did talk about this earlier about during the meeting that we had with Everything Rollinsville. The focus was brought up by Timberline. The serious issue is fire protection and the water issue. And so expanding that to the rail, I can see where you probably added that in order to meet the climate resiliency issue. But also you have in here housing. So it's kind of, it seems to me that you're expanding the project so that you can get the grant, and that focusing on the real issue, which is the water problem there and the fire protection.
And I have a different perspective, because when we had the Ready Grant, we hired the consultants and they did the, economic development plan for the county, but they really focused on Rollinsville. Then they had a charrette, and so residents came, and non-residents too, came to that charrette, and Commissioner Broom and I attended. And really everything mentioned in this were part of that, because the focus is not just on firefighting water. That is a key issue, because at this point, Chief Owner has indicated that he's not favorable for further building there without firefighting water capacity on both sides of the highway. So that is a key thing, but the residents and the businesses really would like the county to do anything that we can to improve parking, roads, traffic, maybe have safe pedestrian pathways that that bikes could maybe use as well. And then housing, there's some housing in the area, but it's not in the best of shape. And so the challenge that came up in that meeting, and then you had the second community meeting at the observatory that you mentioned. The other thing that's come up is that there are so many property owners, and I always say this because that's where I live up there. So just between the end of Rollinsville to the other end of Rollinsville to get to the first large residence, there are 13 landowners. So to bring everyone together has never come together. And in the past, we had a homeowners association that I was a part of, and we had a lot of these same discussions, not too much on the rail, because that was kind of like wouldn't it be great kind of conversation, but really the firefighting, water, housing, parking, roads, where the road, the travel portion of the road versus the right-of-ways. They've all been discussions that have come up. So I would say that I do see the broader aspect would meet what we've been hearing from our residents.
Mhm. And I'd add to that, in attending those meetings with the community, they did stress and want a whole community development approach, which included the businesses and then potential for housing and, and safe walkways for the residents, as well as people visiting the area and the businesses. So I would think that this would kind of meet those expectations, and we haven't, or the county as a whole has never really done something for the infrastructure of that area. And so this would be, I would say, an opportunity to address a lot of those issues and set a good foundation for the expansion and for community and business development there.
And this grant, really, the purpose is to assess, analyze, and then develop a plan. Not to actually do anything, but get it ready, like you said, to have a plan that could be used as a basis for these state and federal grants. So we could finally apply for some of the funding.
Yeah, I guess to Commissioner Mornis's comment, some of the things that are here were kind of, I believe when we had discussions about Ready, were asked to be included. So I kind of carried them over. So the scope has been similar. I know that the train came up in discussions that we should include some initial study. It would have been pretty limited in the ready proposal because of the amount of money we had. But that's why I just carried a lot of it over. But we tried to sit there and really expand it and kind of, I guess, put together a more concise vision, because all these things do come together. I mean, the water for sure is the most critical.
Mhm.
It's a concern, even if today you just pressed like pause and nothing happened there, no structures were constructed or modified for the next 20 years. I think you still look at it and say, this is a public safety concern. We don't have water here. Any water that we use is gonna have to be brought in. And you have a decent density of structures that are quite close together with industrial/commercial uses. So I think on that point, to go back to my earlier comments, I think we do need to figure out some solution to that issue, no matter what happens.
Mhm. And that's all for existing at this point.
Well, yeah,
Because, yeah, I know that was definitely a concern of the fire chief during the discussion.
Well,
concerning
what I'm
Roseville.
thinking is $150,000 is not monopoly money. That's serious money that we're applying to this, and we were planning and initially having 30,000. So the concern about spending that kind of money when we have a city, central city that is having issues with trying to do economic growth, and why aren't we supporting a city, that city, because they're an economic engine for us. Whereas Rollinsville, this is a safety issue, this is a water issue, and it's expanding to, city streets and sidewalks and housing development. I think that we should really focus on what the issue is, which is fire safety. And I'm just thinking, if we're gonna spend that kind of money on Rollinsville, we should be helping our central city with the issues that they're having.
So you want to give
economically.
central city money? Is that?
For moving forward with housing development, and I'm just saying, this round, this is in the county, it
Yeah.
belongs to the
Well,
county.
I think it's
This is
two
a-
separate issues and two separate discussions. We are in discussion with other opportunities as far as housing, but I think primarily we need to look at Rollinsville and the safety issues there, water and their infrastructure, because even their septic is a concern, and there are some problems there, so real problems that one way or the other we're going to have to be dealt with, and we'll need information as to how to go about that.
And we are working with Central City. I see Mayor Fay is here. We are working with Central City. We're having discussions. We've been having discussions before the previous boards have been having discussions with Central City about how to partner on some things. And, it's great that we're really focused on housing, how to make that happen. So it all has to do with economic development. And that's a big piece of this, because even as recently at the fair, I was able to talk to many of the business owners that are mid-county and north, and they're wondering, what the county can do to help. They don't expect the county to have a magic wand and do everything, but I think that they were excited by the previous community meetings, that there's discussion, they have some clarity about what the key issues are. They've heard loud and clear from Chief Owner that without firefighting water, it's just not practical from a public safety point of view to have more structures. And so as the community is growing and our county grows, if we are participating in the thoughtful discussion about that growth and how to make it work for our residents and our small business owners, I personally think that's a good thing to have that role as a county.
Is there some possibility that we could get an organization like the Peak to Peak Business to put some money towards the grant? I mean, is it just the county, or have we reached out to the business owners or the property owners or the Peak to Peak Chamber of Commerce to put some skin in the game?
So I would say the Peak to Peak Chamber is new, so they probably don't have a lot of resources to support. The business community, there hasn't been any sort of outreach, but part of this application and this proposal, if we are awarded and a consultant is hired, is there would be a considerable amount of outreach. And the cost would be much greater for the actually putting in the utilities later on. And that's when we would need a lot of buy-in from the community. So I think that would be the time after we have the plan and effort to really reach out to the community as to how best to fund it, because ultimately that infrastructure is going to cost millions and we don't have millions to support, but it's to benefit the people of Rawlinsville and the greater Gilpin County as a whole. So I think that would be phase two afterwards. But at this point, there has not been any outreach as far as I'm aware about financial contributions.
No, but, on that point, I think we have been quite successful, after the fact at getting additional match dollars. We, when we came for local planning capacity, originally it was just a county match, but, the town of Netherland and Lyons both committed 5,000. And then on the housing needs assessment for Strong Communities grant, that also was a full county match, but then both Blackhawk and Central City committed 10,000 each to that effort. So we've been successful at after initial application, getting other jurisdictions to support us. And I'm sure we could even talk to the town of Netherland if maybe they would be interested in supporting this effort, if it involves the potential for a combined system. Maybe they would be willing to throw in some money to help us out to study this. They've been always very supportive of our efforts in the past on other grants. So that's an option. I guess to kind of go back to your original concern, it is a significant dollar amount, the 300,000 with $150,000 match. The reason I came in with that is I just want to make, I don't like it when I'd rather spend a little bit more and get you good deliverables and a better outcome at the end than not spend enough and just give you high level. I was kind of trying to, with this opportunity with Energy Impact, try to get you more to a place where like, we're giving you more solid deliverables, more detailed deliverables at the end of the project, so you can make a better decision and you really know like, okay, this option's this X amount of millions of dollars, this option is this option looks like this. So I guess that's where I was hoping to go with spending a bit more, was trying to get us, more detailed answers than we would have got out of the 150,000 through Ready. So that's kind of the thinking that I had there.
So
Well-
if we were to, maybe not pursue 300,000, but 250 or 200,000, what part would you see would need to go away? Or do you think that you could get the bulk of this done? And of course, it's a grant application, so we don't know what's going to be even approved.
Right.
They might approve 150. I mean, we just don't know until you submit it.
I guess I would ask the board to strongly consider the proposal at the 300,000 if possible. If we do need to cut it back, that's fine. I think I can't necessarily do it on the fly. I think it's just that based on what's awarded, what you're allowing us for, we're gonna narrow it down because everything's gonna come down to build time with the firm that's selected. So we'll divvy up the build time in a way that's more advantageous to answer the bigger questions rather than the smaller ones. So it's like and that may be the case even if we went for the 300,000, we may get into this, and because of complexity, because of things that come up, because of questions that are asked, that could increase the build time on any one of these items and may cause a reduction in another area. So that's how we would manage that. I'm supportive of the board if they want to reduce it below 300,000. I mean, we can still do work, and we'll focus on the most important questions, which I think is water, wastewater, and the area specific plan.
Traffic flow.
Yeah.
Which
So-
one is that?
Right.
That'd be number 3.
So if I could provide some context, it might help the board. In the draft budget for 25, obviously, we're still working on it internally. But I did ask Director Gutierrez to put in a number in his amount in his budget about a Rawlinsville specific plan, specifically tied to passenger rail. It's my understanding that the number of communities from Arvada all the way up to Steamboat are working on some sort of plan and planning effort so that they can tie into potential future funding to support that. We do not have any sort of plan associated with passenger rail. So I asked for him to put some element in the budget that would be discussed with the board once it's shared with you, which hasn't happened yet. So that's kind of a precursor for that. The expenses for this, if approved by the board, would actually be in 25. So it essentially would be confirming that amount for the 25 budget for a broader, more expanded Rollinsville project. The other aspect I think for context is important is obviously COVID impacted Gilpin County dramatically because the two cities in Gilpin were heavily impacted by the closures, the casino closures primarily. And this is part of why we move forward with the Ready Grant and see about how we can diversify our economy. And one of the 4 areas that were identified was specifically Rollinsville and how we can get Rollinsville more of a standalone city to provide services up here, needed services up here, and away from reliance on the casino industry. So I think that's important context, is we're trying to fulfill the areas, the concerns that have been raised historically of how we can make improvements here in context. So we're kind of rolling in 2 projects into one with the request before you. And the expenses of this will actually be in 25.
I'm
I have
going-
a question on the actual resolution. Well, first of all, I was just going to reiterate that in the first one, it mentions pursuing collaboration with neighboring jurisdiction and increasing public participation regarding long-range planning. So it's just not a point in time, it's like the future. What is our community seeing as? how
Which
the
item are
future-
you referencing? This is on the
resolution.
resolution. Okay.
Yeah, and so it's in there on the first one. But my question on the 4th one is that the way it is worded, it says mixed-use zoning district for the unincorporated area. I'm thinking that needs to be tightened up. It's either like a zoning district within the unincorporated area or for the Main Street corridor or something, because unincorporated Rollinsville includes, Lump Gulch and, it's far, it's big. So I think that from your discussions with the Ready Grant, this grant, the Ready Grant we had before is really on the commercial and mixed-use residential.
So you're suggesting the town site of
Either-
Rollinsville.
Or
If
a
I
zoning
But you
district.
said there is no town site. Remember, we just had that discussion as far as the area of Roslindville is not defined.
Yes, that's true. But I was gonna say, what if we just said, if I modified it to mixed-use zoning district for the Main Street area of Rollinsville, would that be more concise? It's an issue we've had with the planning commission. Every time we have these discussions, people are like, well, where?
Right.
And it's like, that's not defined, and we're working on that as part of the land use code update so that we can do a new zoning map and specifically delineate this area, which is mostly what's adjacent to Main Street and Toland Road on that corridor that you referenced with the 13 private property owners.
Because I know there's been discussion about a historic district in the past,
Yeah.
including the yacht club, that area. And so that isn't right on the Main Street, but it's kind of adjacent. So I
Well,
think just to
and-
better define where you're looking at doing it.
And it's something that needs to come through, like some community engagement and feedback, particularly for the zoning district and discussions with those property owners of like where specifically that is. Obviously, this study in the project area is gonna have impacts beyond that main area. Because one of the things that is probably gonna be the case, particularly for public water and sewer, is nearby residents in those nearby subdivisions may have to be included if you're looking at financial and technical feasibility. Because there would not be enough users if it was just limited to Main Street on both sides.
Mhm.
So that would probably be part of the consideration.
That would need to be, because I remember previous discussions I've had with DOLA in terms of even the school had applied for DOLA grants and they weren't eligible because DOLA wants more community, i.e. residential areas to be included as well, instead of just a school district or commercial area is, one of their criteria that they look for is how much do you encompass. So that would be a consideration, I know, for future funding considerations.
And I know in talking to both private residents and businesses that not everyone wants to tap in right away.
Yeah.
I think they see it as a community good, because it'll help resolve some of the issues that are existing there, which could lead to businesses, closing down temporarily until the problem is fixed. Kind of like what's going on with the school, they're kind of on the verge of not being able to operate till they get that done. It's the same way with some of the properties there. So I would think that part of the plan would be like if there was a possibility of maybe people supporting it verbally, but phasing in, because there are people that just spent, tens of thousands of dollars on new septic, and so they're not so excited about now having to tap in, but they support the concept for the whole greater good.
So in that language, if I said whereas the draft Gilpin County Land Use Code contains a new mixed-use zoning district for the Main Street area of Rollinsville, would that be a little more concise about that specific item?
Instead of just the unincorporated
Yeah.
area.
Because that is what that's specific to.
Right, yeah, just to
Okay,
really
so I have
focus it.
Draft Gilpin County Land Use Code contains a new mixed-use zoning district for the Main Street area of Rollinsville, which is the
Again.
intent.
Again, that's not defined.
Not totally, no. We still need to have those conversations. But I did want to demonstrate to DOLA the work that is being done this year in the direction
Mhm.
that we're going,
Right, and the street is Main.
Yeah,
That is the name of it.
Keep it. Well, and speaking to, I've had conversations with groups for they're interested in economic development. And one deficiency they have cited in Gilpin County is any kind of a plan or formalization of this. And so at least this would give a framework and kind of foundational knowledge, because they've asked for studies and what kinds of information. And they say when they look into the Gilpin that there's things of this nature are one area that we're kind of deficient in at this point.
I mean, a somewhat of a parallel is that we did do the economic development plan. And so that's, available. And now we're working on housing needs assessment. And that's really to quantify where we're at and where we could go and what the community would like.
Mhm.
Those are all the elements of it.
Yeah, and then this would add the layer of the infrastructure, which is really important when you need to move on or would like to move on.
I have a question on 3A, 3B and 3C. It says poor roadway surface conditions, lack of stormwater management systems. Is the county responsible for the roads in that area?
we do maintain them, yes.
So is there some reason why we have not kept up they say poor conditions, why haven't?
Well, I would describe them as poor conditions for an urbanized setting and for the use that's starting to occur, which includes the extensive parking, the higher levels of traffic. I think maybe 5-10 years ago, a dirt roadway with no stormwater infrastructure was adequate, given how quiet it was. But I think I was trying to just demonstrate to DOLA that if it's going to continue to go in the direction that it's going, what's there is not going to be adequate. And, it's also going to be costly for the county to continue to maintain a dirt road for an urbanized type environment. Maybe urbanized is not the appropriate word, but
More dense.
it's dense,
Mm,
yeah,
dense.
with the higher intensity of use.
Well, and I know A2 is something that John Combs had brought up during the meeting, is the lack of clearly surveyed and delineated public right-of-ways.
And that plays into the maintenance because it's hard to
Right.
know exactly where the right of way begins and ends in that area.
We have the county surveyor here looking into our county's property there.
He is already looking into that and has identified some challenges.
I think we've spent almost $16,000 this year just trying to figure out the actual location of the right of way in relation to the original town site plan on the west side. But it's just extremely costly for us to just even do that research of figuring out where's what. And it's still kind of hazy. So there's the background research, and a lot of that's visible to the public through the GIS portal now. There's a parcel fabric layer map, and it kind of shows you that recent work of where we're figuring out where things are actually lining up.
So what is this grant going to do for that? I mean, is that we're already moving forward and trying to delineate what is county property there and
Yeah, we are, but I don't think we can afford that work. I mean, we easily spent 60.
so this money is going to be supplementing what we're doing now.
Yeah, as far as figuring out what some of those things are, and I think we also could use help from a consultant to give us more of a plan of what's the best way to deal with these kind of issues, and particularly navigating, because one of the things there is that town site plat is old and not of great quality, and then some of those subdivisions were not surveyed super accurately in that area. So I think we're gonna need some guidance on resolving those issues, because there's figuring out where we think things are, and then there's resolving those conflicts with private property owners. It's gonna be challenging.
Which is
Right.
happening throughout the county because it comes to the board often,
Yes.
those issues.
Right. I
So,
mean, the records that the Public Works and Community Development have had to work with are just so inaccurate because they were created so long ago. I remember there was this actual specific situation in Rollinsville on the west side where there's a property owner that wanted to build more structures, and then in the past had approval with their ILC, not a complete survey, an ILC about the boundaries of their property. But because time had passed, the road had crept because they were looking at where people were driving, the travel portion of the road, which leads to another, criteria about figuring out where it is. So it became really a muddied mess, and that person wasn't able to build yet. So this would help clarify those boundaries. So 2 years ago, we asked, well, I think it was when Corey finally started. Was that 2 years ago? That we did ask that the surveyor survey the county property, which is where the old schoolhouse is across from Public Works, just to get our postage stamp measured out. And then that was a starting point for more surveying. But I know Public Works has said, if you look at the mapping of the roads up there, like above on Colorado and such, where the roads are supposed to be would go through someone's living room. So they're just not great records. So anything we can do to get the roadway figured out would be great.
Just one last point, Commissioner Moore, is just on the stormwater infrastructure, stormwater management. That's definitely a concern there, and I think will be an increased concern because so many of those structures have extensive lot coverage. So some of those existing structures, they're like either approaching 100% lot coverage in a building or surface area. And so none of those lots have the ability to capture or mitigate stormwater. And so at some point, if we want to continue any development or support kind of a dense town site development, there's going to be a need for off-site stormwater management and detention there because people don't have the space on their own property to do so. So that's going to be an issue.
I'll just add to that, in the past, the neighborhood association, we kind of looked into like, should we apply as a group, and try to be like the Main Street, like Central City has the Main Street, which is a Colorado, program that they fund, in the, like I said, the historic district. Just what could this community be and have? But it never got enough momentum to actually happen. So I think that people that have lived there for some decades are thinking, and what I'm hearing is, oh, yeah, a plan would be good. I don't think there's no promise in here that we're going to fund and do anything, but this would open up doors and help create that community conversation about what the north part of the county will look like and what the needs are there. Because I also know that people that live up that way, they don't want, big development, no box stores, no apartment complexes, no monstrosities and all of that. So they don't want industry up there just because people have the generational land for a reason. And, part of the pristine part, we always talk about keeping the rural aspect, of Gilpin. And I think that's part of it too, is retaining the land and the property so that they have that mountain appearance and the mountain appeal to people.
Mhm. But I think a lot of this, or the majority of it really is solving problems that exist today with what's there right now, which is important to understand as well. Because there are significant problems and, you know, they're not getting better, they're getting more complicated as we go forward. So we need to keep that in mind as well.
I was wondering if you did reduce the application amount and reduce the scope to what I consider the two most likely issues. One is water supply as for fire mitigation and looking at a way to address that. As you indicated, it's a problem now. It'll only get worse in time. And then also keeping the mountain rail line station as a I don't know how complicated that would be. I mean, as far as a rail station, I know you have to have a side rail, you know, for pulling off, et cetera, and having a platform. I think the issue is location and getting the location. One of the issues that Commissioner Hollingsworth brought up before is having cisterns along the rail to address any fires from like we had previously a fire started by the rail, the engine or whatever caused it, and not having any water storage along the rail. So I think those two are, to me, are the most important and the most focused, and to you know, put our money in, and you know, putting the county's money into that as at this point in time. The other issues, we know there are issues. We're working on them slowly but surely as far as doing the surveying. And again, I think that's a place where we should be putting our emphasis.
And I personally, I think the surveying and the roads they're like basic infrastructure. Without the surveying, we don't really know the area we're talking about. So clear delineation and define parameters would be really helpful for all the planning. And without good roadways and good roads that drain and that will also help with the maintenance, because look at South Beaver, such drainage problems there, you know, that we're looking at spending a significant amount of money just on that road because those issues haven't been addressed.
And also
So-
because it is an egress point for an emergency egress. That was one of the first things that was brought up as far as from Timberline, that is an important road to maintain. Besides that, it has been a problem for years.
Sure. And so, but my point is that it's important as a basis for planning, because if we don't have roads to get people to and fro, and there isn't definition of boundaries so that people can develop on their properties, then it's just stalling. It's stalling a lot of what the landowners can do, and what the businesses can try to work together and create, you know, as a community.
So you're saying items 1, 2, and 3 are, you consider a priority?
No, I think, because number 4 is to develop a development plan. So that's kind of the essence of why this would even be done. It's not just going to be assessing, it's going to be developing a plan that the community is informing us about.
Plan for business development or just future
Economic development,
economic development.
businesses, improve public safety, the firefighting water, it's just all going to be elements of a plan, a comprehensive plan, but focused on that area. I know we haven't really talked about housing specifically in that area, and it's kind of something like there's potential for more housing there. Do you feel like the housing element is good to keep in here too? I think it is, but can you talk about that?
Well, yeah, because some of the more housing now best practices, which is from the governor's initiative, it's kind of what unlocks additional funding for this EIAF and increases your scoring. We previously committed to exploring those practices when we committed to Strong Communities Grant, and that was in our resolution approving that, which was, I'm not gonna say them off the top of my head, but several, like improving accessibility, prioritizing development in developed areas, reducing sprawl, reducing development in open agricultural areas. Some of those we did commit to those strategies. So I figured, and it's like, we've already said to DOLA we would. So I figured that it wouldn't be hard for us to continue that in this area. Obviously, that's the issue that we're facing in this county is there's not much I feel like we can do on the housing front without either working with the two towns in the infrastructure that's here or looking at infrastructure in another place, whether that's mid-county or whether that's Rollinsville. Outside of that, I don't think there's a lot we can do on that front because we just can't support, we can't support density or an affordable housing project, or even the senior housing was an issue because we just don't have, the water and sewer.
The infrastructure.
And I do notice that in item 4D, it does use the term town site. You want to take that out and in item E, is prioritize the correct word for that plan? Would it prioritize housing?
I guess that
There.
depends on how it comes together and the feedback from the community. And I kind of use that language to be consistent with the scoring of the grant. Because applications that demonstrate that affordable housing will be prioritized are going to score higher.
Yeah, I know sometimes, I've
So
done
we would
grant
be looking
writing.
at multifamily housing in Brownsville to prioritize.
Not necessarily. One of the things that we talked about with the planning commission was just allowing, commercial level business on a main floor and then maybe a residence above or up to 6 dwelling units on a single property is kind of where they were, which would be pretty limited. But that was kind of our initial discussions from a zoning regulation standpoint.
And there already is. There are multifamily residences there
Mhm.
already.
In that area.
They're just older. They need a little TLC. And I know that some of the property owners haven't wanted to, use their own funding because they're trying to promote affordable housing. So they're in discussions with some of those landowners, property owners. They're like, oh yeah, if there was funding available to help them improve their properties so that the housing would still exist but be nicer or more expanded, we're open to hear that kind of stuff.
One thing about the term affordable housing that that means different things to different people. But I think increasingly in Colorado, and particularly in the mountains, when I hear affordable housing, especially after our conversations and with Summit County and in some of these counties with resorts, to me, often affordable housing just means housing that people who actually live and work in that community can live in. As we
Yeah.
saw from some of these housing studies of our counties to the west, increasingly people are not living and working they're working in the county, but they're not living. So I think
Increasingly, it's become known as workforce housing.
yeah, so that could be,
Or attainable housing.
yeah, and
Yes.
that's why the state has kind of endeavored into the middle income housing funding options. So I think for Rollinsville, we could retool that language, but I guess our goal would be to just make sure that there's housing for people to live and work there. As it is, a lot of people, as it is now, but to maintain that for the future and not necessarily turn it into a place where it's just transitory type of housing.
Well, and I know
workers.
that in other jurisdictions and somewhat in our discussions, a focus on our first responders, our teachers, people that would like to live in the community and can't find housing, either because there isn't enough rental housing, or it's too expensive, or it's occupied by someone that lives here but works elsewhere. Those are all things that we've talked about trying to address too, and so you can have it deed restricted so that it has to be people that live and or work, it would be work, in the community. I know other counties have done that.
The commissioners want a change there, prioritize workforce housing for those living and working in the community.
I don't agree in adding item number 4 at all on this
Okay.
application. So I think I would agree to focusing item 1, 2, and 3, but not item 4. So I have no comment on that.
Okay.
Let me see how it reads. Because 4 is all about, again, I've already said this a couple times, but number 4 is to develop the plan. So it seems like we can't really take that out because that's the goal of the whole thing, is not just to assess. So let's see.
Would that
Current
preclude you from getting grant money if that was removed? Item number 4.
I think DOLA would be a little concerned
Mhm.
about removing 4 entirely. I think DOLA would want, I guess,
It's almost a summary of why we're doing the work, why we're looking at these different things. So I think it's absolutely necessary at
It's
this
like-
point,
Yeah,
because it almost summarizes our goal or intentions.
Well, I think what's happening is we're changing our goals to meet the grant. Because to me, the goal is fire safety for the city and also taking advantage of the rail situation, also having fire safety along the rail.
and
So to me, it's like, okay, this is, to get this grant, you have to have these things in there, but that is what we really want to focus on.
Well,
And I know we're kind of starting to repeat ourselves, but I'll repeat myself again. So number 4 is really the culmination to me. It's like 1 through 3 is what we're assessing and why we're assessing. Number 4 is that we're culminating in a plan. And that is actually what the Ready Grant was for. It was to develop a plan. It wasn't just to do more assessing, because we had already done that through the economic development plan. So for me, number 4 is essential. That's like Commissioner Berman just said, that's why we're doing it. And that we're going to end up with something to work with, not just assessing.
I mean, the program purpose of DOLA is demonstrate the need for the project, show that the project is a high priority for the community, and demonstrate local commitment to complete the project. Move the community towards increasing community resilience. Demonstrate a relationship to and or address energy and mineral industry impacts. So I guess we could do, yeah, I just would be concerned that the comprehensive plan component, I think, would be good to demonstrate a level of commitment to the community. Because even if we did the water sewer part and we just were like, we're not gonna do a land use component, and say and DOLA says, yeah, sure, and we get through it, then once we go for an infrastructure grant to maybe take it to the next level, I still think that if we would either need to do something in our comp plan, we need to tie it back to the comp plan. It's just that having that amendment that the board approved and the community engaged on and they supported would be really helpful to getting additional grant dollars down the road. That would be my only feedback on that.
In number 4, it also says, so it says specifically, develop and adopt an area-specific development plan. And then it also says promotes locally owned small businesses. And I know that that's something I highly support, because our locally owned small businesses, and I think that everyone on this board does. And then to promote redevelopment, yet retaining the character and the history. And then it also says to identify potential government mechanisms, as you've described, like how we would get it done. I just don't see how we could remove 4.
and
Going back to this particular grant again, it's called the, what was that again?
Energy and Mineral Impact Assistance Fund grant.
So what does that mean to us?
It's a grant that's available. I mean, do you want to speak on that? Give you some, talk plenty. Give you an opportunity.
Yeah, so this grant specifically provides political subdivisions that are socially and or I'm reading from the grant description and or economically impacted by the development, processing, or energy conversion of minerals and mineral fuels. So it's funding for communities that have been or are currently impacted by mining activities. And since it really applies well to this county, which has had a lot of that in its past history, and it's to increase economic development and community development in those communities that have been impacted in whatever way by mineral mining and other
It is the same grant that we received for the community center annex, so that's 650,000.
And it's also the same grant that we received for the human services building,
Yes.
the remodel of that.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah. So let's see, without any other questions or comments, will we be ready to go ahead and make a motion?
And then we amended the language in the whereas, mixed use zoning district for the Main Street area of Rollinsford.
Okay, so it'd be for the resolution 24-108 as amended.
Right, and then on 4D to not refer to it as town site.
What would you
Or-
just say of the area?
Does the board
I'm
want?
sorry, did you say not refer it to Main Street?
No,
So-
to, you had mentioned the word town site wasn't really accurate.
On
So on
D.
4D, it also says town site. So I was just suggesting to use a different term there.
And did you want to change 4E to workforce housing instead of affordable housing? Is that changed?
I don't think we ever decided.
Okay.
Yeah, I don't think that's necessary because at this time, those are interchangeable in terms of looking at housing developments.
Can I make a motion to adopt resolution 24108 with the amendment on fourth whereas to change unincorporated area to Main Street area? And second one was where?
On 4D,
Promotes development.
instead of at the last word town site, change to area.
Town site to area. And to, for a not to exceed price of $200,000 of submittal price
Total project cost.
of 200,000.
Okay.
If I could make one additional comment, under section 2 authorization C, BOCC does hereby authorize the BOCC chair and staff to execute a grant agreement. I would strike the and staff to, and it should really just be the chair to execute a grant agreement.
Oh.
And
Also
I'm
to
sorry,
add the
where was that?
amendment on item C
Oh,
to remove and staff. And motion,
okay, and you're putting the limit at 200,000?
yes.
And I'll just second it to take a vote.
Okay, all in favor?
Aye.
And those opposed? Nay?
Nay. And Madam Chair, I move to approve resolution 24-108 for all the aforementioned amendments, but for a grant proposal of 250,000. See how that goes.
With a match of 125,000.
Yes, up to.
Okay.
It's all up to, correct?
Yeah.
You can-
And a second? And I'll second that motion. And all in favor? Aye.
Aye.
And those opposed?
Nay.
Okay, and so the second motion passes by a 2-1 vote. So with the change of 250,000.
Okay. Thank you, commissioners.
Okay,
Thank you.
thank you.
Thanks for all your work, both of you.
Okay.
So I recommend the board recesses, then convenes as the Board of Equalization before a point of
Sure.
order.
Madam Chair, I Make a motion to recess as Board of County Commissioners and reconvene as the Board of Equalization.
I did second.
Okay, and having the motion a second, all in favor?
Aye.
And so we are now convened as the Board of Equalization. And do we have any business before?
No business before the Board of Equalization, the assessor's office. Any sort of protest to the assessor's office value was not received by this office, so there was no items to consider.
Madam, do you want to
So we,
Do
reconvene?
you
as-
want to motion?
yeah, if we can make the motion.
I move that we adjourn as the Board of Equalization and reconvene as the Board of County Commissioners.
Okay, and a second,
Second?
and all in favor?
I
So we've reconvened as the Board of County Commissioners. And can I have a motion to adjourn to our scheduled work session?
Madam Chair, I make a motion to adjourn the Board of County Commissioners and to convene as the honor work session.
I'll second.
Okay, and all in favor?
Aye.
And so we'll now go on to our work session agenda. And our first order of business would be wildfire mitigation on private lands program discussion. And we have Chief Paul Under to present.
Yeah.
Morning.
Morning.